Everybody, how are you? I hope you are all right. Today we are going to finish with Napoleon Bonaparte. This class is going to be dedicated to the downfall of Napoleon, and with this class we are going to finish also unit number 1. The course of Napoleon's career from 1808 to 1815 is a record of the creeping decay of his conquests. From the coup d'etat of 1799, remember the end of the French Revolution, to the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807, he reached a position of extraordinary power. But soon after the treaty with Alexander I, remember Alexander I was the Tsar of Russia, problems trebled, and finally they overwhelmed Napoleon in such a way that everything ended up in an absolute chaos. So, we are going to start with the beginning of the end of Napoleon. Napoleon's decay sprang out from a multitude of causes. With the passage of the years, Napoleon grew more egotistical and fanatic. He kept nurturing the idea that he was a man of destiny until it developed into an obsession. Also, his aggressive policy of militarism provoked an inevitable reaction amongst the peoples he had conquered. And remember, the peoples can be used in plural in history. The more violent Napoleon turned, the stronger was the determination of the vanquished to regain their freedom. Finally, the continental system proved to be a boomerang because it was more damaging for France and her allies than for England. It was impossible for Napoleon to exclude British products from the continent because most countries were agricultural and they needed to trade the things they produced for manufactured goods from England, because as we are going to see in the next class, England was the first country to be industrialized. So, which were the steps that ended up in Napoleon's downfall? The first chapter of Napoleon's downfall was the Spanish Revolt of 1808. Napoleon decided to take Spain and obliged the king and the crown prince to resign. He promoted his brother, remember Joseph, who was in Naples? Well, Joseph was promoted from the king of Naples to the king of Spain. However, the Spanish people were determined to revolt and to resist. No sooner had the new king been crowned than the people rose in revolt. Napoleon imprisoned the king, Ferdinand VII, paving the way for the wave of revolutions in the viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata, as in the case of our country in the May Revolution. As Ferdinand VII was not more the king, liberal ideas spread in America, weakening the Spanish Empire. Napoleon, who was used to crushing their enemies, found heavy resistance in the Spaniards, who planned guerrilla attacks with the support of Great Britain. We cannot overlook the fact that Great Britain helped the Spanish. The spirit of Spain in resisting the invaders promoted, obviously, a sense of defiance elsewhere, with the result that Napoleon did not count on the docility of his victims anymore, because Spain was the first proof that people could revolt against Napoleon. But the second episode in Napoleon's downfall was the termination of his alliance with Russia. Russia was undergoing appalling economic conditions when she was no longer able to resist because of the continental system. She needed to exchange her surplus grain for British products. So she needed to trade with Great Britain. As a consequence, Alexander I started to trade with Great Britain and ignored the terms of the treaty he had signed with Napoleon. When Napoleon received the news, he decided to punish Russia and gather an army of 600,000 men. The project ended up in a dreadful disaster. The Russian army destroyed the Grande Armée, that was the name of the French army. When the French entered Russia, the Russians refused to make a stand. So they didn't fight from the very beginning and move further and further, and made Napoleon's troops to move further and further into the heart of Russia. There, near Moscow, the Russians gave battle at Borodino. That was the name of the Battle of Borodino, very near Moscow. Napoleon believed that he had won. In fact, he was sure the victory was his. But when he realized that Moscow was destroyed, he got to know that the only thing he could do was to move around the ruins of the Kremlin. So here he made his first mistake, because he occupied the capital of Russia, but what he ignored was that the Russians had decided to put Moscow under fire. Yes, Moscow was put under fire by the Russians. When Napoleon realized what was happening, well, he lingered amid the ruins of the Kremlin. Napoleon's ambition led him to make a series of blunders, and this was the first. To linger amid the ruins of Moscow for a month, waiting for the Tsar to abdicate. When he realized that the Tsar was not going to resign, he decided to come back to France. That delay was a fatal mistake, because the freezing Russian winter caught them before they had reached the border. So the troops were starving, they were ill, and they were exhausted. To make things worse, Cossacks, who were a group of strong independent Russian soldiers, attacked Napoleon's army in the way back to France at night, transforming French troops into a weak remnant with thousands of corpses around their campfires. When the Grand Army reached Germany, there were just 300,000 exhausted soldiers, and this obviously destroyed the myth that Napoleon was invincible. Soon after this, the Prussians and the Austrians regained their courage, and with the help of Russia, joined in the War of Liberation. So here started another war. As you can see in this picture, it took place in the Battle of Nations in Leipzig. This is a German name. That is why it is pronounced Leipzig. So at the beginning of this war, Napoleon won a few modest battles. This led Napoleon to think that he was going to win easily, but he was finally defeated at Leipzig in the Battle of Nations. His vassal states collapsed and abandoned Napoleon. So Napoleon was left alone and was defeated by the Prussians, the Russians, and obviously the Germans. So here you can see part of Paris, because France was invaded after the defeat of Napoleon on March 31st, 1814. The Allies entered Paris. Once the great army of France was then humiliated by the Austrians, the Prussians, and Russians. So that Grand Army was humiliated in this war. One of the first revenge movement in modern history that we can see, the revenge from the Russians towards the French. So after obviously the triumph of the Austrians, the Prussians, and the Germans in this battle, they decided to invade Paris, and Napoleon had to abdicate. Napoleon had to sign the Treaty of Fontainebleu, renouncing to all claims to the throne of France. In return, we cannot overlook that he was highly respected. He was given a pension of 2 million francs a year and full sovereignty over the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. This island is located between Africa and America in the Mediterranean. It was a paradise because It was an island with view to his hometown Corsica, to the island of Corsica. So Napoleon was privileged. It was, as I said before, a paradise. But was Napoleon happy with this? No. Napoleon was not satisfied at all. So Napoleon stayed in that island for a while. Meanwhile, in Paris, in France, it was decided by the invaders that the Bourbon dynasty, remember, the Bourbon or the Louis dynasty, had to be restored and in the throne of France. So Louis XVIII became the king once more. However, he was obliged to respect the political and economic reforms that the French Revolution had brought about. So it was a limited monarchy. At this time, when the dynasty was restored, the allies, that is to say, Germany, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, well, the allies were quarreling over the dominance of Poland. The French, obviously, were disgusted with this new government. Under this context, Napoleon slipped away from Elba. Yeah, he escaped from Elba. He entered Paris with the troops he could gather on the way back to France, and was received triumphantly by peasants and ex-soldiers. When Louis XVIII realized that Napoleon was one more time in Paris, he decided to escape. He fled to Belgium, although he had sworn that he could die in defense of his throne. But he forgot about that, and he escaped to Belgium because he was absolutely afraid of Napoleon. The final defeat of Napoleon took place in the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon took the position of emperor again, but only for a short time. The Allies abandoned their bickerings and formed an army composed by British, Dutch, German soldiers. Under the command of the Duke of Wellington, 6 days later in Waterloo, Belgium, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. He returned to Paris and abdicated for the second time. He was planning to escape to America, but everything was guarded, so he was exiled first in a British ship, and then he was exiled to the Atlantic island of Saint Helena. I repeat, to the island of Saint Helena. That is the correct pronunciation. And this island, yes, is between Africa and America, yeah, which even nowadays is a British colony. So correct the previous information. The island of Elba is in the Mediterranean. This island, this rocky island, that is to say, the island of Saint Helena, is between Africa and America, and it is even nowadays a British colony. There, Napoleon could not escape. He was not motivated at all, and he died on May the 5th, 1821, in loneliness and poverty. Yeah? So, unfortunately for Napoleon, he had his last days in loneliness and poverty. Was Napoleon important? Yes, he was, because there was a huge significance of his reign. For example, the abolition of serfdom was confirmed. He allowed the peasants to keep lands. Remember that this had happened during the last part of the French Revolution, and he allowed these lands to be kept by peasants. And the spread of revolutionary ideas was also important for the significance of Napoleon, because his real significance lies in the fact that he helped to preserve the results of the French Revolution in France. So this is the end of Napoleon's life, Napoleon's government, Napoleon's wars, and the downfall of Napoleon. You have in the previous classes and in these last two classes all the information about Napoleon. In our first class, I am going to post some questions for you to think and to answer on your own, of course, and you will monitor yourself how much you know about the content that I have been teaching on the YouTube channel or in the classroom. For example, 4th A had some classes with me, 4th B did not have classes with me, but all of you have the classes uploaded on the channel. So see you next class. Thank you very much.